It seemed like a good idea at the time. When House Speaker Robert DeLeo came to power 6 years ago, he was a firm advocate of term limits. He pushed to get an 8-year limit on the speakership reinstated.
The people must be comfortable that what we are providing is the highest standard of service when it comes to public employees.
But now the clock is ticking on his tenure, and so today DeLeo called on his fellow House members to abolish that same 8-year term limit he once so enthusiastically favored, amid reports of a profanity-laden kerfuffle with members of the media as they awaited the results. Joining me now is Pam Wilmot, Executive Director of Common Cause Massachusetts and a staunch proponent of term limits. Hey, Pam.
Hi.
So tell me why you think this is problematic, because a case could be made that these are democratically elected legislators doing something that is perfectly legal, amending the rules for their body. So why do you have an issue with this?
Well, we've supported term limits for Speaker and Senate President for a long time. We actually did a ballot initiative back in 1983 on rules reform. It was actually thrown out by the Supreme Court, but whatever. So it's really critical reform to have an orderly transition of power. No one wants to give up power. They need to have a rule in order to move out, or otherwise what happens is that speakers tend to stay on as long as they can and hold on to that power. It's not surprising, and typically they leave when there's an ethical issue, or occasionally they get deposed by an opponent, and even much rarer is leaving on their own accord.
For his part, I should mention that when Bob DeLeo was asked whether he's going back on his word, he said he's not really changing his mind, but rather that he's evolved in his thinking.
I wouldn't say I'm going back on my word as much as the fact that over 6 years, rightly or wrongly, I have learned and feel that I have learned in terms of what the importance is of doing away with the term limits that we have in our rules.
I want to bring in Mike Dean, a reporter and editor for State House News Service, who I believe shot that video that we just saw, right?
I did, yeah. That was me standing outside the Democratic caucus for about an hour and a half
So, Mike, whether Bob DeLeo is evolving in his thinking or changing his mind, why is he doing this now? Is it about holding on to power, like Pam said? Is it about padding his pension, like Howie Carr says? Maybe a little of both, maybe something else?
Well, as far as the rules of the House go, they can only be debated at the beginning of a session. So if he was going to make a major rules change like this, it would have to be today, at the very beginning of the 2015-2016 session. So it wouldn't be the kind of thing that you would just throw out a year from now,
Anytime,
throw
right.
out by the end. Under the current term limit, DeLeo would be up in, I believe, January or February 2017 would be his swan song. So he would have to make that change before this session begins.
I know I'm asking you to play armchair psychologist a little bit, but in terms of motive, what do you think is driving his desire to stay on as Speaker?
I think he sees himself on top. I mean, a lot of people would say that he is on top of Beacon Hill right now with a new Republican governor and a new Senate president from the Democratic side, a little further left than the Senate presidents we've had before. And Bob DeLeo, as a more conservative Democrat, sees himself in the middle, and he's the most senior member of the big three, as we call the three leaders on the Hill. And he could be kingmaker for a long time.
Pam, the Boston Globe quoted Representative Garrett Bradley saying, basically, this is something that is being done for the good of the chamber, that it's important that we have the respect of the governor and the Senate, and that this makes the House more potent, more robust as a governing body. Do you buy that at all?
I think even if you had a speaker that was going to be leaving, for example, that happened last year in the Senate, last session, it had just as much power vis-a-vis the House, because they have the same institution rather than individuals such as a governor or a president that may have lame duck status. I think for the good of the body that these rules need to stay in place. And then again, that's about how that transition happens. I do not think there's necessarily a golden number at 8, but having a number in place where people actually leave.
You're talking 8 years of serving as Speaker, right?
Right, 8 years, could be 10, could be 6, whatever, but there needs to be a number, a limit where people actually leave. We saw that in the Senate, it worked very well. It could work in the House as well.
Mike, do you think the House would be just as powerful a body if there was a brand new Speaker?
It could very well be. I think that the House is always going to be the House to a certain extent. You know, the dynamics of the three parties, with the governor, the Senate, and the House, are always going to exist. Now, the authority and the kind of momentum that a body might have from that seniority, and this is DeLeo's argument. When he says he has evolved, he said that he's learned a lot about leadership and a lot about what the Speaker can and should do, and he has put himself in that position and now values experience over, you know, a lot of the points Pam's been making.
What are you two hearing as you talk to people about what's going on in the House? What are you hearing about how the House rank and file, or, you know, House leadership members who maybe in theory could pose a challenge to DeLeo or try to mount some sort of rebellion? What are they saying about this? Is anyone unhappy with what he's doing?
Well, I don't see any rebellion happening. Before we left, their vote actually hadn't happened, but I'd be absolutely shocked if it doesn't get pretty close to unanimous on the Democratic side.
So no rebellion. Is anyone saying to you, hey, Pam, you know, I'm all for term limits. This is a pain, but I got to deal with it because otherwise I'm going to end up in a basement office, you know, looking at a wall?
Yes.
You're hearing that? Okay. Are you hearing that kind of thing, Mike?
That's what, you know, is always hanging over the heads of the rank and file in the House. You know, the real estate of offices and committee assignments, things like that. I will say that all the reps that I talked to who took part in the Democratic caucus today, where they really hashed things out prior, you know, the closed door debate before the actual debate on the floor, they said they had a very robust conversation. And
Speaking of robust conversations, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I nearly forgot to talk about this kerfuffle that occurred, in which two reporters, I believe it was Garrett Quinn, right?
Garrett Quinn from Mass Live.
And your colleague Gindumcius from the State House News. They wanted to watch the caucus where this was being discussed before the vote. And at one point, a court officer said that they needed to leave and asked them, why can't you be, or asked one of them, why can't you be a expletive-deleted gentleman? So kind of an odd, overly dramatic, tense thing to occur. Were you there for that conversation?
I was on the other side of the door. I couldn't hear what was going on, but I saw the altercation from the outside in the hallway. Those two are nothing but gentlemen, so I don't know what that court officer was talking about. Basically, there was no rule on the books that said that they couldn't be there until they voted to close the caucus.
Pam, is that something you've seen? Because I think the State House News write-up, Mike, I can't remember if you did it or someone else did mention that there has been a prohibition on photography in the House chamber, but there is no clear rule that bans photography. How many sort of shadowy protocols are there that make the House, or, you know, the Beacon Hill as a whole, less transparent than it should be?
Well, there's lots of things that I think reformers would like to change. That was one additional change that actually moved backwards in these rules. Now members can't take photos on the floor, nor can the press, which wasn't in the rules before. Already the public couldn't do that. Caucuses, though, you know, there's always been the possibility of voting to close them. That's what happened today. I think many court officers just assume that there's a rule. There isn't. There have to be a vote. We'd love to have everything open if possible. I think there is a role for private conversation. There's always going to be deals behind closed doors. That's the nature of the beast. But we need to do more, and the Senate actually did a good job this time around opening more things up, and we'd like to see both branches moving in that direction. Briefly,
I want to throw a couple more questions at you guys. Is there a risk, do you think, here for either Bob DeLeo himself or for Democratic legislators who go along with this rule change? Might they pay a price at the ballot box down the road?
It's a distinct possibility. I think that will be up to their opponents to make a deal out of it. I think we saw a lot of conservative groups targeting certain votes that members made throughout the last session, things on, you know, veterans benefits and things like that, that did do a lot of damage. They didn't pick up that many seats, Republicans, but they gave some Democrats some runs for their money. If this is another issue like that, they could make some.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be brought up in the next election.
All right, and my final question, very quickly, two-word answers. How long will Bob DeLeo be here now that he's changed the rules?
I mean, it could be another 2 years. It could be another 4. It could be 1. We don't know.
We don't know.
No, we don't know. All right, we'll leave it there. Pam Wilmot, Mike Dean, thank you both.